So the Black Lives Matter riots were the most destructive riots in American history, bar none. If you look at the damage in terms of real dollars, then you could see that, but even further than that, the damage in terms of criminal justice policy will be felt across the country for years, if not decades to come, with increases in crime and more people dying as a result of the fact that people were outraged over this situation involving George Floyd and they demanded change. Now, I talked about at the time how I totally understood the outrage. I saw the video and I got from that video that it looked really bad. Now, I was one of the first people to point out that George Floyd actually complained about not being able to breathe well prior to the knee being placed on his neck, and there was actually evidence that I thought could have brought up some reasonable doubt claims at trial that Floyd might have been experiencing an overdose at this period of time, but the case was resolved how it was resolved, and even if I thought there was reasonable doubt, the fact of the matter is the defense did not produce a convincing counter-narrative. And the fact is, the jury probably was in the tank for the Black Lives Matter movement at the point of trial. But set that aside, because the riots weren't just contained to Minneapolis, even though this was an isolated local incident specifically to the city of Minneapolis. For some reason, the Black Lives Matter riots took over this country, and some of them actually occurred outside of the country. But one of the places where it was incredibly outrageous for the Black Lives Matter riots to occur was in the city of New York. And one of the reasons why this was so outrageous is because the argument put forward by the pro-George Floyd side was that the knee on the neck resulted in the death of one George Floyd, and this move was cruel and it should not be done by any police department. Well, guess what? The NYPD actually banned neck restraint from their police force, and there was rioting in the city of New York, which is covered by the NYPD, in 1993. So these people who were smashing windows of high-end luxury brands on Fifth Avenue for civil rights were doing so against something that you can be disciplined for by the NYPD if you do it while working for them. Now, while the riots were undoubtedly fueled by the Democratic Party, false narratives of evil white racism, false narratives of police misconduct, they were also fueled by Democratic politicians who gave each and every opportunity to cut these people a break humanly possible. And what we're going to talk about today is one of the few instances where the NYPD did their job and arrested rioters before things got out of hand, and how now, 2 years later, those rioters are going to receive one of the largest settlements ever paid out to protesters in the city of New York's history. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored, so let me chuck it to the sponsor, then we'll bring it back over here and we'll talk about it on the other side. If you've noticed an increase in wrinkles, fine lines, and other signs of aging, then it might not just be the unbelievably crippling stress that you're dealing with. You actually might be suffering from a decrease in your body's natural collagen production. You might also notice some brittle nails, some thinning hair. These can also be attributed to a loss of collagen production. This is one of the reasons why I'm partnering with Health with Justice. This amazing collagen powder has 5 different key types of collagen that can help restore that youthful glow, thicken up your nails and your hair, and make you look younger. And the great thing about Health with Justice is that you can try this amazing collagen powder for 60 days money back guarantee just by going to my link in the pinned comment or the top of the description box, healthwithjustice.com. Also get yourself 51% off. That's healthwithjustice.com.
Well, tonight the city is settling a lawsuit with hundreds of protesters from the George Floyd marches in June 2020. Each protester could get more than $20,000 in this agreement.
All right, Fox 5's Linda Schmidt joins us now with more on what police were doing at those protests. Linda.
Yeah, hi there, Steve and Natasha. Well, first of all, the lawsuit is focusing on a policing technique that is called kettling, and that is when officers surround the protesters, they corral them in so they cannot leave, and that it can also make it easier for police to make arrests.
So we know that the Black Lives Matter rioting was completely and utterly out of control in the city of New York, and what we needed was some form of law and order. So at some point, after days of nonstop violent rioting and terror across the city, an 8 p.m. curfew was imposed across the city. However, a group of activists, and when I say activists, I mean criminal rioters, decided that they were going to gather in the Bronx in defiance of those orders, in defiance of that instituted curfew, and have what they called a peaceful protest, but in reality was definitely not a peaceful protest. In fact, From the description of the complaints, what you find out is that these people were pelting the cops with eggs. These people were trying to goad the cops into actually stopping them because their initial strategy was containment. And then the orders came in that these people need to be arrested before things got out of hand, because each and every night previous, the Black Lives Matter riots got out of hand. And I know a lot of people think that you have a natural, constitutional, God-given civil rights to protest racism. In order to do so, you need to destroy some stores and destroy some people and kill people. But the NYPD felt different on the night in question, so they decided to arrest these people.
Some of the mass demonstrations in the spring of 2020 devolved into rioting and looting. As a result, Mayor de Blasio implemented an 8 p.m. curfew. It was on the second night of that curfew that protesters in the Bronx say they were assaulted, abused, and trapped by police using what is called kettling.
Now, of course, there was some resistance, as violent rioters tend to do, so the police pepper sprayed some people, they used some physical force here and there, and it resulted in a arrest of about 300 rioters before they got completely out of hand. And again, they assaulted the cops, they were trying to goad them into violence, there were threats, there were all these things, and this was all in the context of the largest nationwide riot spree in our history. So these people were arrested. Now, the charges against people like this were dropped. A bunch of charges, in fact, even more serious charges during the Black Lives Matter riots were dropped due to the fact that we have a district attorney who refuses to prosecute anybody. We had a very soft mayor as compared to our soft mayor, Eric Adams now, an even softer one, Bill de Blasio, who was pro-Black Lives Matter rioting. In fact, his daughter got arrested in the riots because, you know, the riots are full of privileged, dork, loser kids like this that decide that they need to destroy stuff because they want to make a statement. And oh no, isn't the system so bad, even though my father's quite literally the mayor? And that should have been the end of it. Now, even though a lot of these people weren't prosecuted, and some of these cases, let's be honest, are not really all that prosecutable, you can understand, or you should be able to understand, why the police needed to act in the context of the situation that they were in, as a crowd was getting more and more rowdy. And to me, I find it absolutely ridiculous that when the police stop a riot from occurring, people say, oh, well, they use way too much force. However, if the riot gets completely out of hand, people will say, wow, where are the police? How come they didn't use any force? It's almost as if these people don't understand that the police response can often determine whether or not a riot gets completely out of hand or not. Instead, they act like it's an independent variable that they can judge rather than something that impacts the whole situation. Now, all of these people that are on the ground did not actually get arrested that night. A bunch of these people were just detained by law enforcement officers in order to calm them down. They were cut loose, and certain individuals here were in fact arrested, the aggressors in this riot that was starting up in the Bronx. And even if these cases, again, don't turn out to be prosecutable, you would think that that would be the end of it. But unfortunately, it was not the end of it, because a lawsuit was filed against the NYPD, against the city of New York, for their totally justifiable, 100% defensible tactics. And recently, the city of New York decided to settle out of court for $6 million, paying each of these individuals on average $21,000, and every individual who got arrested would get an extra $2,500.
The city has now agreed to pay the protesters several $1 million to settle a lawsuit. It will pay each of them at least $21,000.
It demonstrates very clearly that the city knows that what happened on June 4th, 2020 in the Bronx was unacceptable and it was illegal.
This is one of several lawsuits alleging the NYPD abused protesters who demonstrated following the police killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. The NYPD releasing a statement saying, in part, the time period was a challenging moment for the department. It was during the height of the pandemic as police officers covering the George Floyd protests were met with acts of lawlessness, including wide-scale rioting, mass chaos, violence, and destruction.
Now, the fact that New York City always settles these cases is incredibly crucial whenever you're talking about the police in the context of a public policy debate, because people will often say, wow, look at how much the police pay out in terms of lawsuits per year. We spend so much money on policing, it's absolutely disgusting. We should defund the police because look at how much they spend on policing. But the thing is, one of the reasons why lawsuits against the NYPD go up so much year over year is not because the NYPD is getting worse or anything like that. It's because people know that the city of New York will settle. You see, lawyers are in fact expensive, and that holds true in New York City almost more than any other place in the world. So the firm that New York City hires to deal with these cases costs a premium dollar. But the thing is, even though at the time you could work it out mathematically and say, hey, look, the cases being fought out in court cost far more than we end up paying, therefore it makes more sense to settle on an individual level. What you don't realize is that when that becomes your strategy, all these opportunistic hacks end up coming out of the woodwork and file more lawsuits, and that drives up the cost more, rather than if you have a city that's willing to fight these people tooth and nail and then go beyond that and try to extract their legal fees from these fraudulent lawsuits. But New York City doesn't do that. They just settle out of pocket, so we end up with inflated numbers of what the police are paying out in liability cases, even though much of these cases are incredibly winnable.
Joseph Giacalone is a retired NYPD sergeant and an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice.
You have to be careful that you're sending the wrong message, too, where basically you're saying that the police are neutered from this point on when you have to deal with a situation of civil unrest.
Now, what's even worse about this case is that many of these people were members of activist organizations, so essentially what the NYPD or what the city of New York is funding in this settlement is their own future demise. They're essentially paying these people who were lawbreakers to break the law and guaranteeing that in the future, if they get arrested for their criminal activity, they will receive a payout again. And just so you guys are aware that these were not your average, everyday, mostly peaceful Black Lives Matter rioters. Oh, it's so peaceful. Oh my God, they only caused billions of dollars in damage. The most peaceful protests in the history of protests. One of the things that is absolutely amazing, and it actually determined whether or not an individual would be arrested during the time that the police decided to do this, was the fact that they were carrying weapons on them, weapons for rioting. During this specific arrest, cops confiscated hammers, lighter fluid, gas masks, and fireworks from the people arrested during this demonstration. And they had particular information, which is one of the reasons why this night, which by the way, was the second night that this group gathered, as opposed to the first night, the police decided to move in and execute an operation basically flawlessly to get all of these people detained, that they were looking to do some damage. So imagine you're dealing with Black Lives Matter riots across the country, but specifically across New York City. You have a group that gathers the night before. All they're trying to do is provoke the police into attacking them so that they have an excuse, because they're a bunch of activists that are looking for a payout against the NYPD, and just any kind of action from them, of course, can lead to that payout, as we saw right here, and you let that go. Then the next day, you get all this intelligence that these people are looking to do some serious damage. So you stop individuals on the way to this Black Lives Matter riot. They have hammers, they have lighter fluid, they have gas masks, they have all these other weapons to engage in rioting. You make some arrests, and then you decide that you need to shut this thing down before it gets out of hand. You do so. Fortunately, even though the Black Lives Matter rioters were throwing eggs at you, they were trying to provoke you into a serious violent response, you execute the operation without any serious injuries, either on the protester side or the NYPD side, which, by the way, is not nothing to speak of, because 1,000 NYPD officers were injured during the Black Lives Matter riots. And you're like, good job. And they don't even take all of these people to jail. They don't even arrest them. They detain them, then they cut a bunch of them loose, send them home, and that's the end of that. Well, turns out it isn't, because you're gonna get sued, people are going to extract money, and the city of New York is not even gonna fight this suit. There are far more questionable instances of what happens during a riot that somebody could look at and be like, oh, I guess that's probably bad, compared to this, that this essentially opens the door for every single Black Lives Matter rioter to sue the NYPD as a group and gain some kind of compensation. This is the highest amount ever paid out to individuals as a part of an overall group, possibly in the history of New York City, and now this is the blueprint going forward for all these activist organizations that want to hurt the system, and then they'll use this as part of their propaganda to say, wow, look at how much the NYPD is paying out in lawsuits, not acknowledging the fact that the city of New York just doesn't want to fight any of these lawsuits. And to make things even worse, nobody spent any time in jail as a result of those arrests. So individuals who were arrested, meaning they got a notice to appear because they were carrying weapons on them, they were criminal rioters, got an extra $2,500 because they got a piece of paper due to the fact that they were committing a crime within the mob of other people who were just temporarily detained. So the only difference between what they experienced and the other people experience was the fact that they got a piece of paper that said, hey, you should appear to court. And of course, those charges were dropped immediately because we didn't prosecute the rioters appropriately. But still, $20,000 for all of them, extra $2,500 if you got a notice to appear for your criminal activity. You essentially have the progressive Democrats of New York City who are anti-police, who are backed up by these activists, using the legal system to shovel money back to those activists, and somehow they're going to turn this around on the police, who again executed an operation perfectly flawlessly, one of the best executions of this kind of detainment possible, and definitely one of the best during the course of the chaos that was the Black Lives Matter riots, and this is what results in the payout. So yeah, we're going to look at a lot more money being paid out to these criminal rioters. It's absolutely disgusting, and it probably just won't be in the city of New York. We will start to see this more and more throughout this upcoming year because a lot of these cases are going to come due. Now, don't believe them. Don't believe the propaganda that this is somehow proof positive that the police are absolutely terrible. This is just the consequences of the cost of litigation going up so high that people have decided, or organizations or cities have decided, to just pay people out to make them go away. This is not right. It's not moral. It's not justified. All those people are complete and utter scumbags. They deserve to be arrested. They should have faced legitimate criminal charges. They should be in jail, if not prison, and under no circumstances should you ever reward people who seek each and every opportunity to take advantage of their fellow citizens, destroy society, and label that some kind of civil rights protest. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the Black Lives Matter rioters getting paid out by New York City. Till next time.